The hood of Officer Drake's patrol car was warm against my palms, not burning, just warm, the way a surface gets when it's been sitting in Southern California's sun since before most people's alarms go off. I spread my fingers flat against the metal and stared at the stop sign at the end of the block, and I made myself count my breaths the way the Army taught me to count them when you're in a situation where every move matters and none of them feel like yours to make. 1, 2, 3. I've had a rifle pointed at me in 3 different countries. I've made decisions in the middle of situations where the wrong call meant somebody didn't make it home. I've been in rooms, actual rooms, where men with weapons and bad intentions were between me and the door, and the only thing standing between a very bad outcome and a manageable one was the ability to stay completely still inside my own head while everything outside was falling apart. So no, I was not afraid of Officer Troy Drake, but I want to be honest with you because that's the only reason I'm telling this story at all. I was something, not fear, something colder than fear. The particular kind of stillness you fall into when you understand that a situation you did not create has just become something you're going to have to navigate very carefully, and that the margin for error is exactly 0, and that no amount of being right is going to protect you if you give them any reason at all, to use the power they have. I've felt that before. I just never expected to feel it 2 miles from the house where I grew up. Let me back up. My name is Marcus Webb. I am 37 years old, and for 15 of those years I have been a first sergeant in the United States Army. I'm not telling you that to impress you. I'm telling you because it matters, both to why I handled what happened the way I did and to what they tried to do to me once it was over. 8 weeks before that Tuesday morning in October, I had shoulder surgery. Routine as those things go. One of those injuries that doesn't sound dramatic when you describe it, but that your body keeps presenting you the bill for anyway, especially after 15 years of deployment cycles and physical demands that don't come with a maintenance plan. The surgeons repaired it cleanly. Physical therapy went well. My doctors had cleared me to return to duty weeks before that morning. I wasn't recovering. I wasn't in pain. I was just finishing out the last stretch of medical leave before going back to base, back to my uniform, back to the structure that had been the shape of my entire adult life. 90 days total. The only instruction the Army gave me was to heal. Everything beyond that was mine to figure out, so I came home. Back to Newport Beach, back to Corona del Mar, back to the house where my father Raymond Webb had lived for 32 years, back to the neighborhood where I'd grown up and the streets I'd ridden my bike on as a kid before the Army became my entire life. It made sense the way practical decisions make sense. Too long for a hotel, too short to rent anything real. My dad had my old room ready before I even landed. First night home, I was sleeping in the same bed I'd had at 17, listening to the same sounds the house makes when it settles at night, and quietly trying to figure out who I was supposed to be when nobody was telling me where to be or what to do. For 15 years, somebody had always been telling me. The answer, it turned out, was the Z1000. I bought it 6 weeks into leave. A 2022 Kawasaki Z1000 in metallic racing green, built like it had a strong opinion about open road and wasn't interested in being polite about it. I had never owned a motorcycle in my life. I had spent 15 years giving everything I had to the Army and calling it purpose, and I had almost nothing to show for it in terms of anything that was purely, unambiguously, completely mine. I bought that bike in cash and felt something I didn't have a name for, not happiness, something more specific. Something like recognition, like finding a thing you'd been missing without knowing what it was called. Every morning for 6 weeks, 1 hour, no destination, no mission brief, no formation time, no one needing anything from me. Just the road and the machine and the Pacific air coming in off the ocean and the particular freedom of moving through the world at whatever speed felt right. That was the whole point. That was all I was doing on the morning of October 14th, a Tuesday, when Officer Troy Drake pulled out of a side street and fell in behind me on Pacific Coast Highway near Corona del Mar. I started that morning the way I'd started every Tuesday for 6 weeks, up before 6, fully present immediately, not groggy, not easing in, just suddenly awake and accounted for, the way military service programs you after enough years. No floating up from sleep, you're just there. By 6:15 I was at the cemetery. My mother, Lorraine Webb, has been buried at Pacific View Memorial Park for 9 years. I visit every Tuesday. I stand at her headstone for exactly 11 minutes. I know it's 11 because I count. The Army made me a man who counts things. Steps, seconds, the heartbeats between sounds. I haven't decided yet whether that's a gift or a particular kind of damage. I left a white carnation against the stone. She loved carnations. I didn't cry. I haven't cried in a long time. "Happy Tuesday, Mom," I said, and then I went back to my bike. The Z1000 was parked exactly where I'd left it, ceramic green in the early light, the kind of machine that looks like it's already moving even when it's standing still. I ran through my pre-ride check the way I always do. Tires, mirrors, controls. Not because I expect to find something wrong, but because some things deserve your full attention before you trust them with your life. I pulled out at 6:47, took the long route toward the coast because I could, because I had the time and the morning and nothing pulling me anywhere specific, and after 15 years of being pulled everywhere specific, that still felt something like grace. By 8:30, I was moving slow through Corona del Mar, 2 miles from my father's house, keeping it steady under 30, both hands relaxed on the bars, the Pacific somewhere behind the houses to my right making the air taste different than anywhere else on earth. I saw the patrol car in my mirror when it rolled out of the side street. I didn't react. I noted it the way I note everything. Quietly, continuously, without letting it show. Newport Beach PD, standard unit, white and blue. Rolling at exactly my speed, like a shadow that had found me and decided to stay. Maybe nothing. I knew it wasn't nothing. After 2 full blocks, the lights came on. I breathed out slow, checked the mirror, signaled deliberately, brought the Z1000 to the curb in one clean, controlled motion, engine off. I moved like everything was being recorded, because it was, but also because after 15 years in environments where ambiguity gets people hurt, I had learned to make every physical movement intentional. Nothing vague, nothing that can be described as anything other than exactly what it is, a man doing precisely what is asked of him, precisely how it was asked, because he understands the rules of the situation he's in. Helmet off, placed on the tank, hands visible, shoulders square. I sat straight and I waited. The driver's door opened and Officer Troy Drake stepped out. He was a big man, 6'2", heavy through the shoulders and neck, with the kind of face that had probably been described as intimidating often enough that he'd begun to take it as a professional asset. His nameplate read, Drake, in clean block letters. His right hand was resting on his holster before he'd finished closing the car door. He didn't look at me the way an officer looks at a citizen he's pulled over for a routine stop. He looked at me the way a man looks at something he has already made his mind up about. The passenger door opened. Officer Kyle Simmons, nameplate Simmons, early 30s, lean, with the restless energy of a man who needs to prove he belongs in the room, got out and did not approach. He positioned himself near the front of the cruiser and studied me from there, one hand loose near his taser, his expression carrying a weight of pre-decided judgment. I recognized both of those looks. I'd seen them before. I'd seen them in places where the people looking at me like that actually intended to act on what they'd decided. These two did not scare me. But I did not make the mistake of underestimating what the moment called for. Drake stopped 3 feet away. He crossed his arms. He looked at the bike. He looked at me. He did not say good morning. This bike, he said, was reported stolen. I looked at him steadily. No reaction, no blink, no invitation for what he was hoping to find. That's not accurate, I said. I am the registered owner of this motorcycle. He tilted his head. Where'd you get it? I purchased it 8 weeks ago. My name is on the registration you're holding in about 30 seconds. I reached into my jacket, 2 fingers, slow and deliberate, every motion in plain view, and produced my license, registration, and insurance card in a single clean stack. 15 years of working in environments where a misread gesture changes outcomes teaches your body to be precise in ways that don't require thought anymore. Every movement I make under pressure is clear, nothing ambiguous, nothing that can be called anything other than what it is. Drake took the stack, looked at it the way you look at something you've already decided doesn't apply to you. Then he unclipped his radio and called in my plate number. The response from dispatch came back clear. Kawasaki Z1000, registered to Marcus Antoine Webb. No flags, no warrants, no holds. Drake's jaw tightened. I watched the muscle in it flex once. He handed back my papers without a word about what the dispatcher had just confirmed. He didn't acknowledge it at all. Step off the bike, he said. Am I being detained? I said step off the bike. I looked at him for exactly 1 second. Then I swung my leg over and stood beside the Z1000, hands loose at my sides. Simmons had started walking a slow circle around the machine, hands clasped behind his back, studying it the way you study an exhibit at a crime scene. Like the bike itself was the problem. Like a clean, registered motorcycle on a public street had no business belonging to a man who looked the way I looked. Drake stepped closer, past procedurally appropriate distance, the kind of proximity that's designed to make a person feel small or crowded or pressured into making a move that gives you something to work with, and then he reached out and closed his hand around my wrist. Not a tap, not a guiding touch. His fingers closed, his grip settled, and I felt the weight of everything that grip was supposed to communicate. Authority, control, the expectation of submission, and I felt the old familiar stillness drop over me like armor. I looked at his hand on my wrist. You're going to want to remove that, I said. My voice was quiet, not a threat, something colder and more certain than a threat. The voice of a man who has already run the calculations, looked at the outcomes, and found them all manageable. The voice of someone who is not bluffing and does not need to be. Drake did not let go, but he slowed. Something shifted in his eyes. Here is what is happening right now, I said, and my voice was louder now, loud enough for the woman on the sidewalk across the street who had stopped pretending to check her mail, loud enough for the man 3 houses down who had turned off his leaf blower, loud enough for all of it to become part of the record. I have been recording this interaction since the moment your lights activated. There is a forward-facing camera mounted to my handlebars. There is a second camera at the collar of this jacket, 120-degree field of view, 4K resolution. Every word spoken on this street since you pulled up behind me is on video. Every movement, every hand gesture, including the one happening right now. The air on the street went very still. Drake's grip on my wrist was gone. He didn't say anything. He stood there, the big certain man who had walked up to my bike with his hand on his gun and everything already decided, and I watched the calculation run across his face. The weighing, the reassessing, the slow, reluctant arrival at a conclusion he had not planned to reach. Simmons had stopped circling. I kept my hands visible and continued, in the same level voice I used to brief officers on legal matters in the field. According to Terry versus Ohio, an investigative stop requires articulable, demonstrable, reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. You called in my plate number. The result came back clean. This motorcycle is registered in my name. At that exact point, the legal basis for this stop was exhausted. I paused. Every second I have been standing here since that dispatch call is an unlawful seizure under the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, and all of it is on video. I looked directly at Drake. I am First Sergeant Marcus Webb, United States Army, currently on authorized medical leave. I hold a JAG certification in military law, and I am formally requesting the legal basis for the continuation of this stop. The street held its breath. Drake took one step back. "You're free to go," he said, just like that. No explanation, no acknowledgement of his hand on my wrist 2 minutes ago, or of the dispatcher's clean response he had chosen to ignore, or of anything that had happened on this street in the last half hour. He said it the way someone slams a door shut. Like the conversation was over, like whatever had happened before the door closed didn't count toward anything. He turned and walked toward the cruiser. "I need your badge number," I said to his back, "and your supervisor's direct contact information. That is my legal right." He stopped. His back stayed to me. I watched his shoulders change. He reached into his shirt pocket, produced a card, and held it out without turning around. I walked the distance and took it from his hand. Simmons pulled a card from his own pocket and extended it at arm's length, not stepping toward me. "The way you offer something to an animal you've decided not to get close to." His eyes were flat and hard and said nothing. He didn't speak. I took his card too. I stood on the sidewalk in the October morning sun and wrote down everything. Drake's badge number, Simmons's badge number, the vehicle unit number from the rear panel of the cruiser, the timestamp on my phone screen. I wrote slowly. I wrote all of it. "Thank you," I said. Neutral, exact, not warm, not cold. I walked back to the Z1000, put my helmet on, clipped the chin strap with both hands, threw my leg over the tank, and turned the engine over. I did not rush. I signaled before leaving the curb. I maintained the posted speed limit for the entire length of the street while Drake's cruiser sat motionless at the curb behind me, and I did not look in the mirror. Not once. 6 blocks away, I pulled into a small parking lot off PCH and killed the engine. The morning was quiet. Somewhere above the roofline, birds. Somewhere farther off, a lawnmower starting up. The ordinary sounds of a Tuesday in a neighborhood where everything was supposed to be fine. I took off my helmet and held it in both hands and sat with the weight of it. I knew what I had. I'd been building the complaint in my head from the moment Drake's door opened. I knew the footage was clean. I knew the law. I knew the precedents. I knew what this was. I also knew what was coming. In 15 years of watching institutions protect themselves, military, civilian, government, private, I had learned one thing that held true every single time. The person with the badge gets to the keyboard first. The person who files the report first controls what the record looks like before anyone else gets to write anything on it. They would move before I finished my coffee. My phone buzzed. A text from my cousin Deshaun. "Yo, someone just posted a video of you getting pulled over on PCH. You good, bro?" I looked at the timestamp on the text. 9:14 a.m. 37 minutes since Drake's lights had first come on in my mirror. I sat in that parking lot in the October sun and felt the shape of what was coming. Not with panic, not with fear, but with the clear-eyed, specific, unsentimental awareness of a man who has navigated worse and come out the other side, and who knows that the only real question now is not whether this is going to get harder, but how ready he is for what hard looks like. I looked at the Z1000, at the glint of the collar camera, at the handlebar mount, then I put on my helmet, started the engine, and rode toward my father's house. I had work to do. The coffee in my mug had gone completely cold. I noticed it when I tried to drink it. That flat, slightly stale temperature that tells you your mind went somewhere your body didn't follow. In 15 years of military service, I'd trained myself to drink coffee while it was still hot, because the window for small comforts in the field is almost always shorter than you'd like. Going cold meant I'd been sitting at Raymond's kitchen table, laptop open, long enough to forget I was holding a mug. I carried it to the sink, emptied it, refilled it. Then I sat back down and made myself read Drake's incident report a second time. In 23 lines of clean departmental prose, Officer Troy Drake described an erratic, hostile, threatening subject who failed to cooperate with a lawful investigative stop, who escalated the encounter through aggressive verbal behavior, and who used rehearsed legal terminology in a deliberate attempt to intimidate officers performing their duties. He described a subject who had to be repeatedly redirected before complying. He used the word volatile twice. He used the word hostile 3 times. At no point in those 23 lines did Drake mention that the plate came back clean. At no point did he mention that I had produced my registration before being asked. At no point did he acknowledge his hand closing around my wrist. He filed it at 2:14 p.m. I had still been on PCH at 2:14 p.m., the Z1000 under me and the Pacific off to one side, and my mind already building the framework for what was coming. He had left that street and gone directly to a department computer and written his version into the official record before I pulled into Raymond's driveway. That was the first move. He had known to make it without waiting. That told me something specific about how many times he had run this play before, and how reliably it had worked. The department's press statement went out at 6:47 p.m. I found it while Raymond was making dinner, the kitchen behind me filling with the sounds of a man who has cooked in the same space for over 3 decades. The particular rhythm of someone who doesn't need to think about where anything is. I sat with the laptop and read the statement straight through, and Raymond must have caught something in my stillness because he turned from the stove and looked at me without speaking. 4 paragraphs. The first, the department takes all community concerns seriously. The second, the officers had conducted a lawful investigative stop in response to a citizen report about a suspicious vehicle. The third, the subject was uncooperative and escalated through threatening behavior, but officers maintained professional conduct throughout. The fourth, and I read this one 3 times just to be sure I wasn't misreading it, both officers' body cameras experienced a simultaneous technical malfunction during the stop. The footage was therefore inconclusive. Both cameras, one stop, one malfunction, shared between 2 separate devices at the exact same moment. I closed the laptop, I set my hands flat on the table, and looked out through the kitchen window at the Z1000 sitting in the driveway, catching the last angle of the late afternoon sun, perfectly still. How bad? Raymond said, still facing the stove. They're saying both body cams failed, I said. Same time, no usable footage. He didn't respond immediately. The burner kept going. The clock above the sink ticked. Sit down and eat, he said finally. Then we figure out what comes next. That was Raymond Webb, not dismissal, acknowledgement. Eat first, because the mind doesn't work right when it's running on nothing but adrenaline and anger. And what was coming was going to require every clear-headed thing I had. He had said those same words to me the night before my first deployment, and again the night my mother's diagnosis came back, and every other time something had arrived at the table too large to be handled all at once. I ate, I cleared the dishes, and then I sat back down. The social media campaign was already moving by the time I opened my laptop again. The first post appeared just after 8 p.m. Anonymous account, stock avatar, 11 followers, created within the previous 6 hours. It described me as a soldier on psychological medical leave who had deliberately selected a neighborhood with active law enforcement presence in order to manufacture a confrontation he could document on film. It called my knowledge of case law rehearsed and premeditated, as though being familiar with your constitutional rights is itself evidence of an agenda. It described me as volatile. It described me as a threat. The vocabulary was different from Drake's report. The specific words were not. I captured a screenshot, opened the evidence folder on my desktop, added it. The folder now had 24 items. By 9 p.m., a second account had surfaced. Different handle, different framing, same core architecture. This one claimed I had planned the stop, that the cameras on the bike and jacket proved premeditation rather than preparation, that a reasonable person would simply have cooperated and been on their way in 5 minutes. It had been shared over 400 times before I found it. I documented it and moved on to the third, which appeared just before 10 p.m. I sat at that table until past midnight, tracking each account methodically. The timing of posts, the pattern of shares, the careful repetition of specific language across accounts that appeared unconnected but moved in coordination, volatile, unstable, staged, rehearsed, distributed across different handles to create the impression of independent consensus rather than one organized effort. It was not subtle once you were looking for the structure underneath it. It was just effective because most people don't look for the structure. I did not respond to any of it. Responding is what they want. A reaction, something emotional, something that can be screenshotted and misquoted and cited as proof of exactly the instability they were claiming. I had nothing to give them that way, and I knew it, and so I gave them nothing. Before I went to bed, I opened a fresh legal pad, pressed a new pen to the top of the first page, and printed 3 names in clean block letters: Sandra Mills, Dana Choi, Ray Castillo. Then I put the pen down and went to sleep. Sandra Mills called at 7:04 the next morning before I had gotten through half a cup of coffee. She is my senior military contact, methodical, direct, the kind of officer who arrives at a problem having already anticipated the next 3 moves. She told me she had been awake since 4 a.m. going through the footage, Drake's press release, and the union's letter. That last word stopped me. What letter? I said. She told me. Gabby Fitchman, representative of the police union, had submitted a formal letter of inquiry to my commanding officer the previous evening. Not a complaint, not a formal grievance. A letter, carefully worded, plausibly deniable, raising concerns about whether my behavior during the stop was consistent with the conduct standards expected of active duty military personnel. The inquiry used the words volatile, aggressive, and pattern of hostile engagement, the same words that appeared in Drake's report. Filed before the department's press statement was published, filed before the video had finished circulating, filed before I had put a single sentence of my own account into any document anywhere. I sat on the edge of the bed in my old room and let that settle. They had gone after my record. 15 years of it, before I had a chance to establish my own account in any official capacity. They had taken what happened on that street and used it, preemptively, strategically, as an institutional attack on my career, and they had done it within hours of the stop. That kind of timing doesn't happen by accident. That's the move of someone who has made this particular move before and knows the exact order of steps. Sandra, I said, the timing alone. I know, she said, it's documented. The union's letter was submitted before any formal complaint process was initiated on your end. Under the relevant statutes, that is not a conduct concern, that is retaliation, and I will make sure it is characterized exactly that way. She told me to focus on the civilian side. She would handle the base. I trusted her on both counts. After the call ended, I stayed where I was for a moment. The room was quiet. The sounds of Raymond's house in the morning, the familiar creak of floors, the coffee maker running, the rhythm of a household that had been operating the same way for decades, came through the walls in pieces. I told myself I would take 1 hour to be angry, 1 hour, then work. I took it in that quiet room, sitting still, letting myself feel the specific shape of what they had done without the filter of professionalism or strategy. The false report, 23 lines of deliberate fiction filed while I was still on the road, the manufactured press narrative, the coordinated social media operation, the attack on 15 years of service through a side door they'd chosen specifically because it arrived before I could defend myself, the particular cruelty of taking what I'd spent my entire adult life building and pointing it at me as evidence against my own character. I felt all of it. I gave it the full hour. Then I picked up the phone and called Dana Choi. Dana Choi is a civil rights attorney based in Los Angeles, recommended through a military legal network I'd worked with years before on a separate matter. What I remembered about her from that earlier contact was one specific thing. Before she agreed to look at anything, she asked a single question. She asked whether the evidence was clean and unedited. If the answer was yes, she proceeded. If the answer was no, for any reason, any omission, she didn't. Tell me everything, she said when I explained who I was. Start from when the lights came on, don't condense, every detail. I talked for just under 20 minutes without stopping. She listened without interrupting once. When I finished, there was a silence of about 4 seconds. The specific kind that tells you someone is not thinking about what to say but reorganizing what they just heard into something they can work with. Send me both videos tonight, she said. Full length, nothing cut. I sent them within the hour. She called back the next morning at 8:15. She had watched everything twice. The dispatch response confirming clean registration, the continued detention afterward, the footage of Drake's hand on my wrist, the officer's body language across the full length of the stop, all of it present, all of it unambiguous, and the written report filed against it, directly systematically contradicting the footage at every significant point. This is a federal civil rights case, she said. No qualifiers, no hesitation. A strong one. I want to represent you. When can you start? I already have, she said. The call to Ray Castillo was shorter. Ray is an investigative journalist who operates out of the LA area. I had crossed paths with him 3 years prior on a matter with some military-civilian legal overlap, and I knew enough about how he worked to trust him with something that required patience. He verifies everything. He publishes nothing he cannot defend, line by line, in front of anyone who challenges it. That kind of work moves slowly because it moves correctly. I sent him both videos with one message. Hold these. Don't run anything yet. I'll tell you when. He confirmed receipt within minutes and asked no questions. He knew how to wait. The third move required no phone call. I drafted a formal written public records request addressed to the Newport Beach Police Department, citing California Government Code Section 6250. I requested the complete complaint history filed against both Officer Troy Drake and Officer Kyle Simmons over the preceding 5 years, including all records of disposition and review. I printed it, signed it, photographed the signature page, and sent it by certified mail and email simultaneously. I saved every confirmation receipt in the evidence folder, which now had 41 entries. Then I waited. 4 days is a long time when you know exactly what is running beneath the surface of things. Gabby Fitchman appeared on a local news broadcast 2 days into the wait, seated across from an anchor with his hands folded on the desk in the practiced posture of a man who has occupied that chair before and expects the conversation to go the way it always has. He told the anchor the video was a fragment of a much longer and more complex encounter. He said his officers had followed correct procedure at every step. When the anchor pressed him on the body cameras, Fitchman offered a patient, measured expression. Equipment fails, he said. It's an operational reality. An unfortunate coincidence, nothing more. I wrote his name in the legal pad. I moved on. The social media operation kept running. I kept documenting. The pattern of language held constant. Volatile, unstable, staged, rehearsed, distributed at intervals that suggested coordination rather than spontaneous response. The post that spread the furthest, shared over 1,000 times before I finished tracking it, had a specific construction I studied carefully. It read, "A soldier with behavioral issues is living in your neighborhood on medical leave. Ask yourself if that's someone you feel safe around." I read it twice. I understood exactly what it was doing, using both my race and my service simultaneously as evidence of danger, converting the things I had spent 15 years building into the very reasons I should be feared. I photographed the screen, added it to the folder, then I put on my gear, took the Z1000 out for an hour along the coast, and let the road do what roads do. When I got back, the envelope from the department was on the kitchen table. Raymond had brought it in from the mailbox and set it down without opening it, without ceremony. He was standing at the counter with his back toward the room, and he didn't turn around when I came through the door, and that particular restraint told me everything his silence chose not to say. I sat down. I opened it carefully. It was not the full response. A cover letter, signed by someone in records compliance, bearing the title Administrative Compliance Officer, explained that certain materials had been withheld pending legal review and that additional records would be produced within 30 calendar days as required under applicable law. 30 days. I would be back on base in 15. I set the cover letter to one side and read what they had sent. It took 11 minutes to get through everything once. Then I started over from the beginning, pen in hand this time, writing in the small, precise script I use when I need to hold something exactly as it was. Drake, 6 complaints filed against him over 5 years. Simmons, 4. Every single complaint, all 10 of them, across both officers, across 5 consecutive years, had been dismissed, and the dismissal language was the same. Not similar, not parallel, the same word for word, formatted identically, stamped at the bottom of each form as though applied without reading the content above it. Complaint reviewed and found to be without merit. IAD, no investigator's name. No summary of findings, no accounting of what evidence was examined or how the conclusion was reached. 1 line, 10 times, a rubber stamp positioned to look like a process. 3 of Drake's 6 complaints had been filed by black drivers. I wrote that number down. I drew a circle around it. I did not write anything beside it, because there was nothing to add that the circle didn't already contain. I turned the page and found the 5th complaint. Complainant, Clarence Hawthorne. Age at filing, 64. Current age, 67. Address, 44 Marigold Avenue, Corona del Mar. I pulled up the map on my phone, measured the distance from Marigold Avenue to the spot on PCH where Drake's lights had come on behind me. 2 blocks. I put the phone down. Clarence Hawthorne had written his complaint by hand in the unhurried, deliberate script of someone who had spent decades in front of students and never lost the habit of treating written words as things that carry weight. He had filed it the same day it happened, a Sunday morning 3 years prior. He had been riding his motorcycle. Drake had pulled him over. Drake had told him the bike was reported stolen. Drake had accepted the paperwork without reading it, run the plate, gotten a clean return, and kept Clarence Hawthorne standing on the curb for 26 minutes. When backup arrived and confirmed the registration, Drake walked away without explanation. Clarence had attached a copy of his registration. He had documented Drake's badge number, the vehicle unit number, and the precise start and end times of the stop. He had filed the complaint because, as he wrote in the final line, I have always believed that the appropriate response to injustice is to use the systems that exist for addressing it. The dismissal stamp at the bottom of his document was identical to all 9 others, complaint reviewed and found to be without merit. IAD. I set the paper down on Raymond's kitchen table. Raymond had come in at some point during the last several pages. I hadn't heard him. I had been too focused, but I could feel him standing behind my left shoulder, reading. The kitchen was completely silent now, which meant he had been standing there long enough to stop moving. I looked up at him. His face had changed. Not the controlled, deliberate composure he had been holding for 4 days. Something underneath that. Something older. Something that read not just as anger, but as the particular kind of grief that comes from recognition. From seeing a thing repeated so many times across so many years that one more instance of it carries not only its own weight, but the accumulated weight of everything it echoes. Dad. I held the paper toward him. You know this name. He took it from my hand. He looked at it for a moment, though I could see in the set of his expression that he didn't need to read it. Clarence Hawthorne, he said, almost to himself. He set the paper back on the table, picked up his phone from the counter, dialed from memory, no hesitation, no looking at the screen. It rang twice. Clarence, his voice was low and steady. It's Raymond Webb. A pause. I watched my father's face across the kitchen while he listened to whatever came back. He covered the phone with his hand and looked at me. He says he's been waiting 3 years for someone to call. I did not take the Z1000 to Marigold Avenue. I drove Raymond's car instead, his Navy Camry, dependable in the way things built without trying to impress anyone tend to be dependable. I couldn't explain the choice cleanly if someone had asked me, except that the motorcycle felt like mine in a way that didn't suit what this errand required. Going to meet a man who had been waiting 3 years for someone to hear him felt like it called for a different kind of wait than freedom. The drive was 8 minutes through neighborhoods I had known since childhood, the same well-kept lawns, the same coastal oaks throwing their morning patterns of shade across the pale sidewalks. I had moved through these exact streets dozens of times over the past 6 weeks, on the Z1000, loose-handed, going nowhere specific. Now, driving with direction, the familiarity of it felt different, not comforting, something closer to evidence. When I turned onto Marigold and pulled to the curb in front of number 44, I sat for a moment with the engine running. The house was kept with care, white trim, a row of low-flowering plants along the path to the front door, recently tended, a wooden chair on the porch worn smooth from regular use rather than decoration. This was a home maintained by someone who paid close attention to the things he was responsible for. I cut the engine. Clarence Hawthorne was already at his front door before I reached the porch steps, taller than I'd expected from the complaint paperwork's bare facts about him, broader through the shoulders, wearing a pressed-collared shirt and a light jacket as though he had dressed for the occasion. His keys were in his right hand. There was something in the way he stood, alert, present, not impatient, but absolutely prepared, that told me he had not been waiting casually. He had been waiting the way you wait, when you have expected something for a long time and made absolutely certain you would be ready when it arrived. He studied me from the doorway with the careful expression of a man who had learned the price of misplaced trust. "Mr. Hawthorne?" I said. "I'm Marcus Webb, Raymond's son." He looked at me for a moment longer. Then something in his face made a decision, and he pushed the screen door open wide. "I know who you are," he said. "I watched the video. Come inside." His kitchen table was not like Raymond's. Raymond's table is a family object, marked by 30 years of use, layered with the evidence of a household that has lived around it through everything. Clarence's table was clear and deliberately arranged, and at its center he had placed 3 items with the kind of precision that doesn't happen by accident. A brown file folder, worn soft at the edges from years of being opened and closed, a clean legal pad, and a ballpoint pen laid across the top at an exact horizontal angle. He had been ready for this meeting long before Raymond made the call. I sat across from him. He settled with his forearms resting on the table, hands linked, and he began. His account was exact, not rehearsed in the way of performance. More the way a thing becomes exact when you have held it carefully in your memory for years, returning to it regularly, keeping its details sharp because you always believed they would one day matter to someone. He spoke without bitterness, which struck me at first. Then I understood. It was something that had passed through bitterness entirely and arrived at a place that no longer required the effort of anger. Harder than anger, clearer. 3 years prior, a Sunday morning, his blue Kawasaki Ninja, a route he had ridden through the neighborhood every Sunday for going on 2 years. Drake's cruiser had appeared from a side street and settled behind him on the same stretch of PCH where Marcus had been stopped 6 days earlier. Same approach, hand resting on the holster before the first word was spoken. The bike had been reported stolen, same language, same delivery, the script reproduced without variation. Clarence had produced his license, registration, and insurance. Drake had accepted the papers without reading them, called in the plate, received the clean return, and kept Clarence standing at the curb for 26 minutes waiting for a backup unit whose presence served no legal purpose anyone could name. When the second unit arrived and confirmed the registration, Drake walked away. No explanation, no acknowledgement, not a word offered. "I filed the complaint that same afternoon," Clarence said. He opened the folder and turned it toward me. "I had everything organized before I got home." The complaint was handwritten in careful, even longhand, the deliberate penmanship of someone who had stood in front of students for 3 decades and understood that written words are not just stored but presented. He had attached a copy of his registration. He had recorded Drake's badge number, the vehicle unit number, and the exact times the stop began and ended, down to the minute. He had included a brief photograph taken on his phone showing the patrol car and his Kawasaki side by side on the shoulder. He had done everything exactly right. 3 weeks later, he received a form letter. He pulled it from behind the complaint and set it on top. I looked at the single dismissal line, the same sentence I had read across 10 separate complaints in the department's public records, positioned at the bottom of each form like a conclusion that had been selected before the document was read, complaint reviewed and found to be without merit. IAD. No investigator's name attached to the finding, no summary of what had been reviewed, or how, or by whom. 1 line, interchangeable with 9 others, spanning 5 years. "I taught civics for 31 years, Clarence said. His voice had not shifted in tone. "I told my students every year that the systems exist because you exist, that if something happens to you that shouldn't, there is a structured path forward. You document what occurred, you report it through the correct channels, and the path functions." He looked at the dismissal line on the form. "I used the path correctly, and they sent me that." He touched the letter once, a single flat tap of one finger against the page. "I kept every piece of it," he said, "because I always believed this day was going to come. I just didn't know how long I was going to have to hold it before it did." I called Dana from the car before I reached the end of Marigold. I pulled over and laid out everything. Clarence's account, his documentation, the identical stop procedure Drake had used on both of us. The word-for-word dismissal language applied to his complaint and to every other complaint in the file without variation. Dana listened in the specific way she listens, not politely but with operational attention, categorizing what she heard as I said it. When I finished, she was quiet for 2 seconds. "1 incident is an allegation," she said. 2 incidents. Same officer, same neighborhood, same type of vehicle, same demographic, same dismissal language applied without any visible process of review. That is a documented pattern, and federal courts treat a documented pattern as something fundamentally different from a single complaint. A beat. "I'm filing today." The lawsuit named Drake, Simmons, and the department, 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, deprivation of civil rights under color of law. 2 plaintiffs, Marcus Antoine Webb and Clarence James Hawthorne. The filing was done before I finished lunch. The department's internal review results arrived on Friday afternoon. 4 pages of passive institutional language, every sentence constructed to reach a conclusion without revealing the process by which the conclusion was reached. The stop was lawful, the detention was brief, the officers performed within departmental guidelines at every stage, the simultaneous body camera malfunctions had been examined by the department's technical division and determined to result from a shared firmware update installed earlier in the week. Coincidental failure across 2 separate devices, nothing more. Both officers were restored to full active duty effective immediately. I read all 4 pages at the counter, then I forwarded them to Dana and put my phone down. The second document arrived 40 minutes later. Dana forwarded it with a single line of her own. They're trying to split my attention. It won't work. It was a formal bar complaint filed by the department's attorney Edison Bryson, addressed to the California State Bar. The complaint alleged that Dana had improperly obtained and distributed confidential internal department records through her public records request in violation of professional conduct standards. 3 specific bar rules cited. A comprehensive disciplinary investigation requested. I understood its design immediately. A bar proceeding takes months. It would require Dana to prepare formal responses, appear before a review board, document her methodology, and defend it, all while simultaneously managing a federal civil rights case with a closing window. The complaint was not meant to succeed. It was meant to divide her capacity at the precise moment when concentration mattered most, and to introduce enough professional uncertainty around her standing to make the case harder to build cleanly. The third message came from Sandra. The military's review of my conduct had been formally escalated. What had begun as an inquiry was now a structured review, carrying a response deadline and sufficient institutional weight that Sandra's JAG contacts could no longer set it aside without their own formal response. My return to duty status was no longer certain. I sat at the kitchen table with all 3 documents open on my phone simultaneously, and I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what was in front of me. Not panic, nothing that dramatic, just the clear, unsparing recognition of how much was now in motion, how little of it I controlled, and how deliberately every piece of this had been timed. The IAD clearance, the bar complaint, the escalated military review, all arriving on a Friday afternoon, all designed to reach me together. They had cleared their officers, attacked my attorney, threatened my career. 3 coordinated moves, 40 minutes apart, 11 days of leave remaining. The kitchen clock ticked above the stove. Raymond sat down across from me that evening without being asked, not standing at the counter, not managing something in the background. He pulled a chair out and sat down fully, both arms on the table, the posture of a man who had come to say something specific and had decided not to leave until he had said it. "I need you to hear something," he said. I'm not telling you what to do, I'm just telling you what's true." I waited. 40 years I've watched this department run in this city. I was living in this neighborhood before you existed. I watched them do exactly what they are doing now to people on these streets while you were sitting at this same table working on homework. He didn't gesture. He didn't need to. I watched them take complaints and file them in a place where complaints go to disappear. I watched them exhaust people, not by winning arguments, but by making the argument too expensive to keep having. That's the design. It was never built to be beaten by one person doing everything right. He held my eyes steadily across the table. They know you have 11 days. They know that once you're back on base, the center of gravity shifts. A case without physical presence loses momentum. Media cycles move on. Lawyers get stretched between competing demands. Witnesses become logistically harder to organize. The story stops being this week's story and starts being last month's, and last month's stories get resolved quietly or not at all. He paused. That is their entire strategy right now, not to win an argument or to run your clock. They've done it before. It's worked before, and they are counting on it working again. The house was quiet around his words. I looked at the calendar on the wall beside the refrigerator, still set to the month my mother stopped needing it, still hanging where she had left it because Raymond had never been able to take it down. She had always said that particular month had the best light. She wasn't wrong. I looked back at my father. "I know," I said. "I've known since the morning Drake filed before I got home." "I know you know." He nodded once, slowly. "I needed to say it out loud so you'd know I know it too, and so you'd know that I'm not sitting here waiting for you to tell me it's going to be fine." He paused. "I'm sitting here because I want to know what we do next." I thought about Clarence's folder on the kitchen table, worn at the edges, held together across 3 years of being opened and closed and reopened. I thought about the $11 complaint form he had filled out in careful longhand and mailed to an address that was supposed to mean something. I thought about whoever was going to come after us, whoever was going to turn onto PCH next week or next month and see a cruiser roll out of a side street behind them, and not have the footage or the attorney or the journalist or the man who knew Clarence Hawthorne's phone number without looking it up. "We end it loud," I said, "and we end it in a way that makes it impossible to put back in the box." Raymond looked at me for a long moment. Then he stood up. All right," he said simply, and went to make coffee. Clarence said yes before I finished asking the question. "I've been ready," he said. Tell me when and where." Ray Castillo's interview space was a clean, unadorned room. Good natural light through a north-facing window, nothing on the walls to pull focus from whoever was sitting in the chair. One camera on a tripod and a colleague handling sound off to the side. Ray met Clarence at the door, introduced himself, shook his hand, and stepped back without ceremony to let the subject settle in on his own terms. "Mr. Hawthorne," I said, "this is entirely yours. Say what needs to be said. Nobody in this room will shape your words or direct what you emphasize. The story belongs to you." Clarence sat down in front of the camera, straightened the collar of his pressed shirt, and folded his hands on the table in front of him. He looked into the lens for a quiet moment, not hesitant, more the way a person looks at something they are deciding how to meet. "Move it closer," he said. He spoke for 38 minutes without a pause. I stood against the wall behind Ray and listened, and I want to be honest about this part. Hearing Clarence Hawthorne tell his story in front of a camera was different from hearing it at his kitchen table 2 days before. At his kitchen table, it had been intimate. one man accounting to another, privately, for something that had been done to him. In that room with the lens recording, it became something larger. It became testimony. It became record in a way that a form letter stamped without reading could never undo. He did not perform. He did not adjust his voice for effect or reach for language that wasn't naturally his. He described what had happened to him with the same unhurried precision he had used at the kitchen table, the Sunday morning, the familiar rote, the lights in the mirror, the hand resting on the holster before a single word was spoken. He described standing on the curb with his paperwork in his hands while Drake held it without reading it and looked at him with the particular expression that nobody should ever have aimed at them on a public street. He talked about driving home and sitting down and writing the complaint before the anger could blur the details, about the care he put into the documentation, about mailing it with the specific trust of someone who had spent 31 years teaching students that documented truth moves through the system and arrives somewhere meaningful. Near the end, his voice got quieter, not unsteady, quieter in the way of someone choosing their words with particular care. I kept every piece of paper, he said, looking directly into the lens, because I knew the day would come when it mattered. I taught my students that the record matters, that what gets written down, carefully and honestly, tells you something real about the world you're living in. He paused. I just had to wait until someone else was ready to write the right things alongside mine. The room held its silence when he finished. Ray cleared his throat softly. Mr. Hawthorne, thank you. Clarence Hawthorne nodded once, picked up his keys from the edge of the table, and stood. Ray published at 6 a.m. the following morning. The piece ran both unedited videos in a split screen, Marcus's footage on one side, Drake's official written incident report on the other, so that anyone watching could compare them in real time without any editorial guidance about what to think. The contradictions between the two were not subtle matters of interpretation or memory. They were structural. Drake's report described a threatening and erratic subject at the precise moments the video showed a man standing motionless with both hands raised, citing established precedent in an even voice. Drake's report stated both officers worked actively to de-escalate. The video showed Drake's hand closing around a wrist. Ray had filed a separate public records request, not for complaint history this time, but for the department's body camera maintenance logs. The department had apparently not considered those worth protecting. The maintenance logs showed Drake's body camera had malfunctioned during 3 prior complaints, Simmons's once before. In every one of those earlier incidents, the associated complaint had been dismissed without meaningful investigation. Ray never used the word pattern anywhere in the piece. The data used it for him. Clarence Hawthorne's 31 years and his 3 years of waiting were in the final section. His photographs, his handwritten complaint, the dismissal letter. The piece ended with his words, printed without additional commentary. By 8 a.m., 3 national outlets had picked it up. By 10, the story had moved past the reach of any single news cycle. Sandra called at noon. Her contact at the DOJ Civil Rights Division, a woman named Lorna Mears with whom Sandra had worked on a prior investigation involving overlapping federal jurisdiction, had reviewed all available materials and opened a preliminary inquiry under pattern or practice law. Lorna needed the public records files, the federal lawsuit, the maintenance logs, and both videos. Sandra had already sent everything that morning. Lorna had said that if the preliminary inquiry confirmed what she was hearing, a full federal investigation would follow. Sandra said she had told Lorna there was no question it would confirm. That same afternoon, close to 300 people gathered on the sidewalk outside the Newport Beach PD's Corona Del Mar substation. It was orderly, handmade signs, a line that extended half a block without blocking traffic. Near the front, an older woman was holding a large photograph of Clarence Hawthorne printed on poster board, his name written beneath it in bold letters. I watched the live stream from Raymond's living room. He sat beside me and neither of us spoke for a long stretch of time. Then Sandra called again. "I need you to hear this directly from me," she said. Her voice carried the steadiness of someone delivering news they have been working toward and want to deliver precisely. "The JAG review has been formally suspended pending the outcome of the federal investigation. Your return to duty date stands. Your record is intact." I sat with that for a moment. 15 years, 3 deployments, a service record that had never carried a mark against it. And for 11 days it had been aimed at me as a weapon, and now it was standing, untouched. "It's not over," Sandra said immediately, reading the silence correctly. "I know," I said. I allowed myself 5 seconds to feel it regardless. The very specific relief of watching something you spent 15 years building survive an attack that was designed with considerable institutional effort to destroy it. 5 seconds, then I picked up my phone and called Clarence Hawthorne. He answered on the second ring and I could hear the television in the background on his end. "Marcus," he said, "Mr. Hawthorne." A silence settled between us, the kind that doesn't need filling, the kind 2 people can share when they have been through the same thing from the inside and understand each other's position without having to explain it. "We're not done yet," I said. "No," he said. Something in his voice was different from every other time I had heard it. A releasing, the particular sound of a man setting down something he has carried for a very long time. Not because the weight is gone, but because he no longer has to carry it alone. "But we're not doing this by ourselves anymore." I looked through the window at the Z1000 sitting in the driveway, green and still in the late afternoon light. 11 days of leave. It would be enough. The morning Drake was fired, I was in Raymond's kitchen making eggs. Not because I was particularly hungry. I'd been up since before 5, running on the kind of wired alertness that comes not from anxiety but from the sense that something is about to resolve. The body knowing it before the mind has confirmation. I was making eggs because my hands needed something to do. My phone was face down on the counter beside the stove. I had silenced the notifications the night before because the volume of incoming messages had become genuinely unmanageable. Not just updates from Dana and Sandra, but forwarded articles, interview requests from outlets I had never heard of, and a significant number of messages from strangers who had located my contact information and wanted to tell me about their own experiences with police stops in cities I had never visited. I didn't have the capacity for all of that at midnight. I had turned it all off. So when Dana's text arrived at 8:17 a.m., I almost missed it. The screen lit up from the corner of my eye. I picked up the phone and read the message. Effective immediately. Permanent record. They collected his badge and weapon this morning. Call when you're ready. 2 sentences. I read them once, set the phone down, finished making the eggs. Then I sat at the table and ate, taking my time about it, because I have learned over 15 years that the moments after something significant resolves deserve to be inhabited. You don't honor the weight of a thing by rushing past it to whatever comes next. You sit with it and let it be exactly what it is. Drake had been terminated, not suspended, not placed on administrative leave pending a review. Terminated. That specific word in the department's formal notification Dana forwarded an hour later. Effective immediately. Permanently entered into his personnel file, his service record, every document trail that would attach to his name going forward. I'll tell you what actually made the termination move from possible to certain, because I think that matters. It wasn't the video alone. Though the video was the foundation of everything that followed, it wasn't the public pressure or the crowd outside the substation or the coverage that had moved from local to national in a single morning. All of those things built the context, but what converted possibility into action was a memo from the department's own legal counsel sent to Chief Warren Pratt, written in the days after Dana filed the federal lawsuit and Lorna Mears at the DOJ opened her preliminary inquiry. Dana obtained the memo through discovery and sent it to me the week it became available. It was 4 paragraphs. The conclusion was direct. Defending Drake's written incident report against the footage from Marcus Webb's helmet and jacket cameras at the federal level was not a legally viable strategy. The report described specific behaviors at specific moments. The footage captured those exact moments. The 2 accounts were not reconcilable, and the gap between them was not a matter of perspective or interpretation. It was a matter of documented fact, and falsifying an official police report, the memo noted, was not an ambiguous allegation. It was an act, and the act was on film. Pratt had Drake's badge and service weapon collected that same morning. Simmons resigned 2 days later, before the department's formal disciplinary process reached him. I was not surprised. From the first morning on PCH, I had clocked Simmons as the kind of man who positions himself adjacent to situations rather than inside them, close enough to benefit, far enough to maintain plausible separation. Resigning was consistent with that pattern. He apparently believed that handing in his badge meant stepping away from the consequences along with the job. He was wrong about that. The DOJ had already named him in the preliminary inquiry documents, and a separate state-level investigation, launched in response to the body camera maintenance records Ray had published, was tracking the malfunction pattern across 5 incidents. Not 3, but 5. Once investigators examined records the department had initially cited for legal review and withheld from my original public records request. 2 of those additional incidents had been buried in the 30-day delay response. The state investigator's referral to the prosecutor's office used specific language. The pattern of simultaneous camera failures during stops that resulted in complaints across multiple incidents involving both officers did not constitute equipment malfunction. It constituted a pattern of evidence suppression. The term in the referral was evidence tampering. Simmons resigned to escape one process. He walked directly into something considerably larger. Chief Warren Pratt announced his retirement on a Thursday morning. His statement used deliberate language about decades of dedicated service, an appropriate moment for transition, and confidence in the department's path forward. The City Council's response used nearly identical phrasing about succession planning and institutional continuity. Raymond read both statements at the breakfast table that morning, side by side, quietly, the way he reads things when he wants to understand them precisely. When he finished, he set the paper down and picked up his coffee. 40 years, he said, not angry, not relieved, just marking the distance between what should have happened and what it took. How many years of complaints filed and dismissed, how many Clarence Hawthornes who did everything right and got a form letter, before one morning on PCH finally made something move. The city manager's office issued a third statement that afternoon, less carefully worded than either of the others. A full independent audit of the Newport Beach Police Department, covering internal structure, complaint procedures, and body camera maintenance protocols, a community oversight advisory board, public input sessions, an interim leadership structure within 30 days. Dana sent it to me with 4 words. First line of the foundation. She was right. An audit alone doesn't change a system. But an audit running alongside a federal investigation, a civil rights lawsuit, and a community that had shown up outside a police substation with handmade signs and stayed. That combination produces a different kind of institutional pressure. The kind that persists past a single week of coverage. The kind that can't be waited out. The bar complaint against Dana was dismissed on a Friday. One sentence from the California State Bar, complaint found to be without merit, no elaboration, no commentary. Dana texted me the disposition. I texted back 2 words, file it. The civil lawsuit was filed the following Monday. The city's legal team reached out to Dana's office within 30 days. A settlement was reached before the case went to trial. The amount was substantial. I'm not going to tell you the number, and I don't plan to. I want to be straightforward about why. The money was never what this was about. Compensation was what the city was capable of offering, and so that's what they offered, and that's its own kind of statement about what institutions can and cannot provide as a response to the things they've done. But a number in a settlement agreement doesn't name what happened. It doesn't put anything in writing about whether the complaint was valid, or whether the dismissals were improper, or whether the person who filed the complaint was right. That's what Clarence asked for. That's what Dana made sure was in the terms. The community fund was his idea. He offered it almost offhandedly during one of the evening calls that had grown into a quiet routine between us over those final weeks, conversations that had started as case updates and gradually turned into something else, the unhurried contact of 2 people who had been through an unusual thing together and found they kept having more to say to each other than the situation strictly required. There should be something for the people who come after us, Clarence said. A fund for residents who can document similar treatment, one that actually processes claims, not dismisses them. Dana structured it into the settlement terms. The city agreed. The fund would be administered independently, governed by a board that included community members and operated outside the authority of any department involved in the original case. Clarence Hawthorne was the first claimant processed. He called me the afternoon his paperwork was approved. I was at Raymond's kitchen table, where so many of the decisions in this story had been made, and his voice on the line was different from every other time I had heard it. Not the careful steadiness of someone managing their composure, something past that, something that had put the weight down. They put it in writing, he said. The city issued a document stating that my complaint was valid, that it was handled improperly, and that I was right. I held the phone and didn't say anything for a moment. That's what I kept the folder for, he said. Not the money, that paper, that acknowledgement. A pause. I'm going to have it framed. Good, I said, and I meant it in a way that didn't need any further explanation, because he already understood exactly what I meant. 5 days before I returned to base, I got up before the sun had cleared the oaks along Raymond Street. No alarm, no appointment. I lay in the dark of my childhood room for a few minutes and listened to the house, the familiar creak and settle of a structure that has been standing long enough to have a voice, and then I got dressed and went outside. The Z1000 was in the driveway where I had parked it after coming home from PCH on the morning this all started. I had not ridden it since then, not for lack of clearance or physical limitation. The shoulder was completely healed. Something else had kept me off it. Some quiet sense that I owed it to the machine, and to the morning I'd been planning to have when Drake's lights came on to finish what was unfinished before I took it out again. A small private accounting that I had been keeping with myself. The pre-ride check was the same as always, unhurried, each item in sequence. Not looking for problems. Just giving the thing the attention it deserved before trusting it. The screen door opened behind me. Raymond stood at the top of the porch steps in his robe, coffee in hand, the same position he had occupied on so many of these mornings. He had heard me moving through the house and come out without being asked, because he understood without needing it explained what the movement meant. He stood there and looked at me the way he has looked at me for the entirety of my life, with the particular calm certainty of a man who knows his son completely and has never been afraid of what that means. I put my helmet on, clipped the chin strap, he raised his mug, I lifted 2 fingers off the bar. I took the long route through the neighborhood, down through the residential streets, past the oaks and the pale sidewalks and the kept lawns, holding the speed easy, no destination pulling at me. The morning was quiet the way mornings in this part of California can be quiet. Not silent, but unhurried, the sounds of the day still gathering themselves. When PCH opened up in front of me and the Pacific appeared off to the right, I felt something change in my chest. Not dramatically, not the way things shift in stories when they need you to feel something, more like a pressure releasing, the specific kind you don't fully realize you've been carrying until the moment it isn't there anymore. I rode south until I reached the block where it started. I slowed, didn't stop, let the bike roll quiet past the stop sign at the corner and the side street where Drake's cruiser had been waiting. The same intersection, the same pale sidewalk where I had stood with my palms flat on the hood of a police cruiser and made myself count my breaths. The same ordinary residential geometry of a Tuesday morning that had turned into something neither of us had planned for. It looked smaller than it had, not in any diminishing sense, just the way places look smaller when the things that happened in them are finished. The weight of an event and the size of its location are not the same. The street was a street again. The stop sign was a stop sign, but something was present in that corner that hadn't been there 6 weeks ago. Something lighter than what I had felt looking back at it in my mirror the morning I rode away. Something that had come to replace the cold. I shifted up and kept moving. Marigold Avenue was 3 minutes further south. I turned onto it without deliberation, or maybe with all the deliberation in the world. I'm not sure which is true, and I think that's okay. I slowed to a roll as Clarence Hawthorne's block came into view. He was in the front garden before I reached his house, bent over the row of plants along the path to the door, watering can in hand, focused on what he was tending with the unhurried attention of someone who does this every morning and does not rush it. He heard the engine. He straightened, turned. When he saw me, he went still for a moment, and then he raised one hand, slow and deliberate, the considered gesture of a man marking something he wants to remember precisely, choosing to be fully present in the moment rather than letting it move past him. I nodded once. Then I turned back onto PCH, opened the throttle, and let the Z1000 do exactly what it was made for. The engine answered the way it always answers, without hesitation, without reservation, honest in the way only machines can be honest. The road unrolled ahead of me, wide and straight, running gold in the angle of the morning light, and the Pacific was out there somewhere off to the right, and the air coming across the bars tasted like salt and distance, and for 1 hour nothing in the world required anything from me at all. In 5 days I would be back in uniform, back on base, back inside the structure that has organized 15 years of my life and asked more of me than I knew I had, and made me into something I couldn't have become any other way. I wasn't dreading it, I was ready, but I want to say something before I go, clearly because this story was never only mine. 2 men with badges stopped me on a public street because they had decided my presence there was inconsistent with their idea of who belonged. Then they used every institutional resource available to them, the report, the press release, the union, the bar complaint, the military inquiry, to make what they did to me and to Clarence Hawthorne disappear behind language designed to look like process without actually being one. They failed. They failed because Dana Choi answered a phone call on a Sunday morning and had already started building the case before she hung up. Because Ray Castillo held the footage patiently and published something that couldn't be undone. Because Sandra Mills documented the retaliation before it could take root. Because Raymond Webb sat across from me at a kitchen table and told me the exact truth about what I was facing, and then stood on the porch at 5 in the morning and raised a coffee cup like it was the most natural thing in the world. And they failed because Clarence Hawthorne kept a brown folder in his kitchen for 3 years, worn soft at the edges from being opened and closed so many times, because he never stopped believing the day would come when someone else would be ready to put the right things in writing alongside his. I've never surrendered, not in any country, not on any street, not in any room designed to make me feel otherwise, my understanding of what I am owed as a person on this earth. That is not something I was born with, that is something I had to earn, in places that required more than most people will ever be asked to give. I'm telling you this not because I believe I'm exceptional, I'm not. I'm telling you because I know what happens to the people who don't have the footage, who don't have Dana or Ray or Sandra or a father who knows the right number to dial. I know what happened to Clarence for 3 years. I know what happens every day in neighborhoods across this country to people who do everything right and still receive a rubber stamp and a closed door. This story had a good ending. Good endings are the exception, not the rule. That's why we have to keep fighting to make them less exceptional. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because what comes next is something you are not going to want to miss.